What's up everybody, I'm Jason and welcome back to another short video looking at some tips and tricks for the EOS R5. In this video, I'm going to start digging into the video side of the EOS R5, and specifically for this video, I'm going to start looking at the video image quality. Now, there have certainly been others that have done this type of work, and almost certainly they've done a better job than I'm about to. However, after looking at some of the tests that I've looked at online, I found I still had some questions I wanted answered. So to start with, every test I've seen uses still images to compare video quality. And okay, fine. I'm going to do the same thing in this video, at least as a starting point too. But video is not a still image. With a still image, the photographer has frozen a moment in time, and it can be studied and observed in detail for basically as long as the viewer is willing to stand there and look at the image. If you want to count the barbs on the feathers around the eye of an eagle, you can do that with a still image. However, in a video, the overall emphasis and expression is fundamentally different. To start with, you're looking at dozens of frames moving by every second. Things are moving, and consequently, there's almost always motion blur due to the comparatively slow shutter speeds that video is shot at. Moreover, the experience is bigger than just a single image. So while I'm starting with still images, in a subsequent video, I'm going to try and tackle the much more difficult problem of evaluating video quality in actual video samples. The second thing that I'm actually interested in looking at this stuff is 1080p or full HD content. Now, I've said in several of my videos that I don't generally shoot in 4K because I have neither the storage or the need. Yet, when it comes to discussing and reviewing cameras, 4K is about the minimum that anybody cares to talk about. So, while in addition to looking at 4K, I also wanted to look at the 1080p output from the R5 as well. And I had a couple of questions there in general that I was looking to answer. So, first of all, how does the full HD output compare to downsampling 4K or 4K high quality files after the fact? Basically, what is Canon doing in the camera to get to that full HD output? Are they just line skipping, or are they binning, or are they downsampling 4K output? What's going on? Finally, I wanted to look at the image quality in crop mode, which nobody else seems to do either. As with the 1080p output, there seems to be a general predisposition towards only focusing on larger sensors. And while large sensors are certainly making inroads into the video community, it's been my experience at least that, at least to the higher end, frame sizes aren't nearly as big of a deal as they are to still photographers, or at least that the still-focused, still-based photography press makes it out to be. Now, of course, this also may go back to those fundamental differences between videos and stills, where frame size just doesn't have as much of a comparative impact on the end result as it does in a still image. Anyway, from Canon's documentation, 4K crop mode in the R5 is downsampled from 4.8 to 5.1K raw pixel output using the APS-C sensor width. And now that's depending on whether you're shooting in UHD or DCI formats. Now, considering it's downsampled and not line skipped, the question is how does crop video stack up against the full frame options? So before I go into the results, I want to stop for a moment to talk about the big caveat to all of these tests. And I'll start with the test target itself. It's not a commercial product. It's a target I developed in Adobe Illustrator and printed on my Pixma Pro 9000 Mark II printer. Now, I didn't just draw things that I thought looked good for a target. The resolution wedges, for example, were actually calculated and drawn so that they should be an accurate measure of resolution. However, there's no guarantee that the accuracy I put into the Illustrator file is going to translate to the final target that got printed. That said, I think, or at least hope, that the errors are reasonably small. Additionally, The test target is fairly small. The maximum working width is about 430 millimeters or so. The small target means that there's a greater potential for errors due to misalignment and lack of squareness. However, the biggest issue in all of this is that I don't have an optical bench, or for that matter, any kind of precision alignment equipment to get accurate, repeatable results from different setups. Now, I'm shooting this from the beefiest tripod I own, a Gitzo Systematic 3 series, and with the most solid tripod I have, a Manfrotto 504X. However, I still have to do the alignment by eye, and honestly, I don't think I did as good of a job of that as maybe I could have. Consequently, regardless of how accurate my carefully designed target is, you can't compare the marked values you see in these tests to the values from anybody else's tests. The best you can do is compare the results from different formats shot at one setup in one position. Which brings me to another thing. Additionally, I had to move the camera, or I did move the camera, for the crop image tests. So those images aren't truly comparable to the full resolution ones either, though I'm still going to do that. As for the test gear, obviously the camera used was an EOS R5, otherwise that wouldn't make any sense anyway. For the lens, I used my Canon RF 24-70 f2.8L IS USM at 70 millimeters. Exposure settings were 1/80th of a second at f4 and ISO 100. The video files themselves were all shot in all-eye compression with 420 chroma subsampling and compressed as 8-bit AVC files. Now, I elected not to use 10-bit HEVC and the 422 chroma subsampling that comes with that, so I wouldn't have to deal with either HDR-PQ or Canon log gamma in post-processing. I just didn't know how that was going to work. Though, to be honest, that might make it interesting fodder for a future video. That said, the test charts are black and white, so the lack of high-fidelity chroma subsampling shouldn't be an issue anyway. Now, on to the test results. So it should be no surprise at all that 4K high-quality or fine image was clearly the best performer in terms of 4K image quality. What surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have, was that taking second place in image quality was 4K crop. Of course, this is downsampled from that APS-C 4.8 to 5.1K sensor width, so that should make sense. Though again, while the setups aren't the same, the difference in image quality is pretty apparent to my eye. In last place for 4K was the regular standard quality 4K output. Now, I certainly wasn't surprised by this showing, but I have to say I was a bit surprised by the image quality that I got in the specific test. Now, I would reiterate my point that you can't compare these numbers or results directly to anybody else's. Don't read the numbers off the chart and do something. But I feel like whatever I did in my test turned in a worse showing than what I saw in DP Review's tests when they did the same kind of thing. Then again, I'm not working from anything approaching a dedicated testing setup, test area, and high resolutions really do demand more precision in a test setup than I really can provide at the moment. All told, if you're shooting 4K with the R5 and your only concern is resolution, it appears you're best off shooting an HQ, followed by APS-C crop mode, and then the 4K standard quality mode. This brings me to the full HD results. While quite honestly, they're somewhat interesting too, full frame HD appears better quality than crop images by, at least to my eye, a reasonable bit. Where the full HD image results gets more interesting to me is when I started playing around with downsampling UHD files in post after shooting. So my thinking is that if you shoot 8K and downsample to 4K and that gives a better result than shooting in 4K natively, then shooting in 4K and downsampling to 1080p should do the same. Now, I might not have the space to spare to store 4K files for the long term, but if I can get better 1080p files, then I can certainly shoot 4K in the field and then downsample before archiving. Of course, I was presuming that the camera wasn't downsampling 1080p content internally either. Cutting to the chase, using bicubic scaling to resample 4K files to 1080p in post resulted in an image that was nearly identical to the 1080p files that the camera produces. There is a difference between HQ and standard quality for downsampling, but I'm also not entirely sure if this difference is just related to the increased contrast that I see in the HQ file, and therefore the blacker blacks, or actually a result of higher detail. Now, all told, if you are shooting in full HD with the R5, shoot in full frame instead of crop, unless you need added reach. In the end, I found that I have more questions now than I have answers, but this video is already starting to get long, so I'll save that discussion for another time. The biggest takeaway here is that you really shouldn't take anything away from this video yet. Sure, if you extract a frame and stare at it, 4K HQ performs better than 4K crop, which performs better than 4K standard quality. And if you're shooting in full HD, the full frame output mode looks to perform better than the crop mode. But this is all, again, using an extracted frame and staring at it, which is not really what video is about. So if you found this useful, or at least a bit informative, please smash that like button. Also, please consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.